Welcome to Only for Your Ears. And I'd just like to take a moment and say Happy New Year to everybody. And also, thank you for the people that have stopped by this podcast and viewed episodes and shared, liked, and subscribed. And most of all, sent me some good love. Thank you very much. Now for today's episode 34. The Philosopher's Stone by Hans Christian Andersen, which I've renamed as Life's Eternal Pearls of Wisdom. The structure will remain the same, starting off with a summary and areas where I'll digress. Then we'll move on to my critical review and how this fairy tale plays in today's society, giving examples from either films or from a book or even real life. Then we'll move on to the last section, which is the trigger points. And as you know, there are some good, positive, and negative trigger points. And we'll try to look at both parts of the trigger points. So let's begin with the Philosopher's Stone, or Life's Eternal Pearls of Wisdom by Hans Christian Andersen. This was a new fairy tale for me, one I'd never heard before. The version is from Hans Christian Andersen's Fairy Tales of the wisest man in the world who lives in a crystal castle at the top of the tree of the sun in India. He knows everything there is to know, including what has happened and what will happen. I digress. It sounds like he could also be a clairvoyant as well as a wise man. In a secret chamber in the castle is his most treasured possession, the Book of Truth, which he had read through page by page, except the section titled Life After Death. Those pages appeared blank. I digress. Maybe we aren't supposed to know what happens after death because we spend our lives not fully living life to the full today. This man had 5 intelligent children, 4 sons, and 1 blind daughter. He spoke to them of the true, the beauty, and the good, and told them that these three held together the world, and by the union they became crystallized into a precious jewel, clearer than a diamond of this of this first water, a jewel whose splendor had a value even in the sight of God. I digress. Of course, this jewel would have to be far superior than anything on earth could comprehend in its brilliance, in whose brightness all things are dim. This jewel was called the Philosopher's Stone. He told them that by searching, man could attain the could attain to a knowledge of the existence of God, and that it was in the power of every man to discover the certainty that such a jewel as the Philosopher's Stone really existed. I digress. I can't imagine it's as obvious as a stone. In turn, each of his sons venture out into the world in search of this jewel. I digress. The idea the children are looking for a stone is a distraction, and as I said, it's not that obvious. And each in turn is defeated in his quest and doesn't return home. I digress. This has to do with saving grace and saving face, with being given a task they weren't universally expected to complete. Finally, the daughter sets out on her own. She experiences all she can, but eventually returns home with only dust. I digress. Wasn't the essence of the planet made from dust, which contained the millions of sparkles, particles that create the luminosity that lights the book. The dust is blown onto the book of truth, illuminating one word. But this was not poor, insignificant, common dust, of course not, which the blind girl had brought. Even the rainbow colors are dim when compared with the beauty which shone from the page on which it had fallen. The beaming word believe from every grain of truth had the brightness of the beautiful and the good, more bright than the mighty pillar of the flame that led Moses and the children of Israel to the land of Canaan. And from the word believe arose the bridge of hope, searching even to the unimmeasurable love in the realms of the infinite. The brothers too found their way home in the end, resolving the fairy tale happily for all involved. As is often the case, it seems the weakest of the people in the story turns out to be the true hero. I digress. The daughter isn't the weakest, but she's underestimated or overlooked because she's a girl and the youngest. Yes, the daughter is blind and fragile, but she's the only one whose spirit is not dulled by the world or the evil one, who returns home as full of hope and faith as she left. I digress. She has belief, which sparks her faith. That's why she, unbeknownst to her, is blessed with finding the truth. The aspect that really stood out for me that made this fairy tales unique, in my opinion, is how its major question and themes are not hidden behind fantastical creatures of unusual events. Well, discounting the whole castle at the top of the tree bit, it comes right out and asks, what's the point of life is? How do religion and rationality fit together? Can truth and beauty and good be found in the world? Bravo. Now for what I call my critical review on how this fairy tale plays in today's society. Well, the first question I'd like to ask is, what does hero mean? Because the little girl, his daughter, turns out to be the unsung hero of this fairy tale. A hero is somebody that people perceive as a winner or as somebody that's conquered or is a champion. I believe a hero is someone that has strong conviction and belief and has the ability to face even the most complicated tasks with courage. So let's begin with my critical review. This is a beautiful story. It's one what you call food for thought, more contemplative. It feels like I'm stepping into the school of life's classroom and receiving some hard truths that need to be told. The idea of using his children to discover planet Earth's secret turns this mundane task into an adventurous treasure hunt. The true beauty and the good on planet Earth. I'm reminded of the film The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, an old Western with John Wayne. Why do I get the impression what's considered bad has been omitted from the fairy tale? Maybe it's to maintain the illusions of a fantasy, after all, without a lot of exaggeration, while still presenting the simplicity of the philosophy, which is hard enough for most people to grasp. I'd like to focus my review on the daughter who surprisingly comes out with a handful of dust and, unbeknownst to her, brings home the essence of the world, which illuminates the word believe. And believe leads to faith. And if you believe something, even if nobody else does, it becomes true for you. But of course, there's personal truth and there's factual truth that's been proven. The daughter is the unsung hero in this story, and for this reason, I would like to frame my review using women in various films and throughout history. Also, I'll use this in the trigger points too. Let's start off with the digress. I digress. The daughter isn't the weakest, but she's underestimated or overlooked because she's a girl and the youngest. The daughter is blind and fragile, but she's the only one whose spirit is not dulled by the word, by the world, or the evil one, who returns home as full of hope and faith as she left. The film Legally Blonde is the one that I'd like to discuss as my first heroine. Okay. The main character is Ellie Woods. She looks a little like a typical ditzy, pretty blonde who one suspects has garbage for brains, but turns out to be very strategic in her approach to solving problems when she's confronted with a real situation where she has to defend her client accused of murder. Here's the plot. In the film, Woods is a sorority sister living in the Delta Nu house at a fictional California University, Los Angeles, where she studies in fashion merchandising and maintains a 4-point average GPA. Wood's boyfriend, Warner Huntington III, the son of a US congressman, breaks up with her the night she expects him to propose, claiming that he needs to marry a Jackie and not a Marilyn. Right there, I would have been happy the fact that he dumped me. I mean, what he's really saying to her, that yes, you look pretty, you're pretty, but you don't have any brains. Warner is bound for Hartford Law School, and Woods becomes determined to gain admittance to the school to win him back, thinking that she's not good enough. If you go to try and win somebody back, there's an underlying feeling that you don't think you're good enough for them and you need to prove something. And this is what she needed to do. Once at Hartford, Woods learns that Warner has a new fiancée, Vivian Kensington, who is a member of the same country club as the Warner's family. Wood is able to exonerate sorority sister accused of murder and decides she does not need Warner. No, she proved to herself and to everybody else that she is enough and she doesn't need her previous boyfriend that dumped her to run after to prove anything to her. In the film's conclusion, Woods gives the commencement address to the law school. See that? Class after proving herself and earning the respect of her peers and beginning a relationship with Emmett Richmond. This is a perfect example of don't judge a book by its cover, which I'm sad to say is a common habit of most societies locked in a one size fits all mentality. So I'm glad to see, for her sake, that she was able to prove herself in more ways than one. Yes, she had a lot of courage. A courage is someone that has the ability to do something even though they are afraid, which turns out to be bravery. The next one is Thelma and Louise, a beautiful, incredible story, and the heroism of these two incredible women. But in this case, whereas with Legally Blonde, the main character was acting from a place of courage and emotional intelligence. You see that within Thelma and Louise, most of the film, they're acting from a place of fear and a defensive stance, which leads them into more trauma on top of more trauma on top of more trauma. Let's go into Thelma and Louise. Thelma and Louise, best friends who stick by each other no matter what. And when there's girls' getaway weekend quickly turns from frivolous to frightening, they find even deeper levels of loyalty to each other and have an effortless chemistry with each other. And Ridley Scott's intimate and thrilling film never judges these women for the decisions they make or for the lengths to which they'll go in the name of freedom. This, these two characters explore and stretch boundaries of what it means to be an emancipated woman. This is what was incredible about Thelma and Louise. They did not hold back on what it meant to be a powerful, emancipated woman. On the way, they stop at the Roadhouse bar where Thelma dances with a flirtatious stranger, Harlan Puckett. He takes her to the parking lot and tries to rape her until Louise intervenes and threatens to shoot him. As the women walk away, Harlan yells he should have continued the rape, causing Louise to fatally shoot him in a fit of rage. This is where the lack of emotional intelligence makes her fear turn into a toxic situation. If she had used emotional intelligence, maybe walked away or turned around and said something to him, but not shoot him, she would have been okay. But she ends up shooting him fatally, meaning that she probably killed him. At a motel, they discuss how to handle the situation. Thelma wants to go to the police, but Louise fears that no one will believe a claim of attempted rape, as Thelma was drinking and dancing with Harlan, and that they have no evidence of rape. Consequently, they will be charged with murder. Yes, of course. Nobody's, I mean, even in today's day and age, people do not believe it when somebody comes forward, especially a woman who was in a bar, dancing on a table and drinking, that a man tried to rape her. And even if she comes forward and says that, they're going to say, well, what do you expect? They're not going to believe her. And she's right, they are going to accuse her of murder. They decide to flee to Mexico, but Louise demands they travel there without going through Texas, as something happened to her there several years earlier, which she refuses to reveal. Heading west, they come across the attractive younger drifter, JD, to whom Thelma takes a liking, and Louise contacts Jimmy, asking him to wire her some money. But he turns up on her front door, basically at the hotel, with the money, and they spend the night together. During this time, I think it's Thelma who is who invites JD, this other man that she's taken a fancy to her room, and he tells her that he's basically a robber, a criminal, but she sleeps with him anyway. This is where my sympathy falls out the window. Why do women still think that they can sleep with a criminal and this person will not do anything? Maya Angelou, a famous poet and a motivational speaker, said this: if someone shows you who they are, believe them. So Thelma sleeps with this man, and then the next day she wakes up and her money's gone. Of course. From here on, their lives become more complicated. The next morning, they discover that JD has stolen her money. And so they go on a goose chase, and then they find this convenience store and they rob it. It just gets worse. And then after that, they're found speeding, and somebody pulls them over for speeding. At the same time, there's FBI that's looking for, I think, Thelma, because the people at the bar where she was dancing recognize her on TV. It's just a really disastrous situation. Anyway, they're about 100 feet away from the Grand Canyon, and a policeman corners them in his car, and the FBI comes behind them, and they try to corner them, and Thelma and Louise say, what are we going to do? Thelma says, I'm stepping on the gas, we're going over the Grand Canyon. So they kiss, and they hug each other, hold each other's hands, and they go to their deaths. And that, I think, is one of the most courageous things that they could have done. And in the end, I absolutely adore them. I think most of the time in the film, they were acting not from a courageous point of view as a hero. They were acting from a toxic place. And wasn't until the very end that they found the courage to do what was probably the most hardest thing, but one of the most fulfilling, emancipating things for their life. That was Thelma and Louise. And the last one is taking a look at The Silence of the Lambs, Clarice Starling, and I think it's Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins, both phenomenal performances. You can't have any fear when you're going up against Hannibal, or at least you can't show it and sniff it out from a mile away. But what's exciting about Jodie's Oscar-winning portrayal of the young FBI cadet is the way she works through her fear, harnessing that nervous energy alongside her powerful intellect and dogged determination. Clara Starling is a hero for every little girl who thought she wasn't good enough. Clara Starling, an FBI trainee, is assigned by her boss, Jack Crawford, to interview the incarcerated Hannibal Lecter, a highly intelligent former, former psychiatrist and a cannibalist serial killer. Crawford secretly hopes she can get insights into the psychopathic serial killers known as Buffalo Bill, who kills overweight women and skins them. Oh my goodness. Starling meets Lecter in his cell at the Baltimore State Prison Hospital for the criminally insane. Although initially courteous, Lecter rebuffs her, deducing Crawford's true motive. As she's leaving, another prisoner, Miggs, flings his semen at her, angering Lecter, who changes his mind and provides Starling with a clue. The clue leads to a jar holding a man's severed head. The man is linked to Buffalo Bill, and Lecter offers to profile the killer on the condition that he is transferred away from Dr. Frederick Chilton, whom he detests. Meanwhile, Lecter influences Miggs into swallowing his own tongue, oh my God, and committing suicide, presumably to avenge his revolting action towards Starling. And another victim is found with a death's head, moth, lodged in her throat. Now, this is a spine-chilling thriller, and through this, he develops a real liking for Clarice so, so much. He admires her because she has the courage to face her fear. She confronts him. She uses emotional intelligence to deal with him. And this is what he finds most intriguing about it. He knows that she's afraid, but she has the courage to confront him. And that's what's interesting. She became a hero, even in Hannibal's eyes, because she was able to connect with him on the human side of this psychopathic serial killer and still be afraid. She observed and walked through the process of fear, which is something that in Thelma and Louise, they really didn't have time to do. They acted on impulse, and therefore their fear turned into toxic actions. So that's the end of my critical review. Now we're going to take a look at the trigger points. Now, the trigger points are very interesting for me. In most cases, they're positive trigger points. They're not really negative. We're going to take a look at Harriet Tubman. Now, Harriet Tubman was an abolitionist and a social activist during the time of slavery. She was a Black woman, and she's the first Black woman to actually be put on American currency. I think it's the $20 bill. I think it's actually going to happen. After escaping slavery herself, Tubman made some 30 missions to rescue approximately 70 enslaved people. Can you imagine? She was free herself, but she went back into the forest several times to free as many slaves as she could. And people said that she said to them, run, 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 run as fast as you can. Don't turn back. Don't look back. You're free. You are free at last. And she went back to rescue her friends and her family and anyone she could, in spite of the fear. And there was a lot of fear as a Black person. So she was, I would say, the beginning of the civil rights movement, really. And it wasn't, and a lot of people think that the civil rights movement was really about Black people. It was predominantly, but there were white people in the civil rights movement too. He served as an armed scout and a spy for the Union Army. Tubman was an activist for the women's suffragette. And as a young child, she was severely injured when she was in the field picking corn. Um, the I think it was the leader, the overseer, threw a heavy iron pole, and it was supposed to hit another slave, but she stepped out in front, and it basically crushed the side of her skull. And she spent the rest of her life with dizziness and headaches, but that did not deter her. She had a handicap, but she kept on going. This is what really defines a hero. Yes, they win, but they win in different ways. It's not just about winning a race. They do things in spite of their fear, and they come out the victor. The next one, I'm going to talk about myself actually, and a person that I met in Canada. So, being a minority, my spirit threw some words of wisdom at me. One day I was walking up Las Ramblas, and I remember thinking, I'm so tired of them telling me, no puedo ayuda, no puedo, I can't help you. And I remember this really irritated me. I think last year, no puedo, I can't help you. I just can't help you. And so, as I was walking up the street last week, it was like spirit interrupted me and said, "What do you mean you can't stand no puedo ayuda? You've had to fight against no, I can't help you all your life, all of your life, Melody. Started in your own family and out in society. Started with your own family and out in society. You have fought against the odds. And even when I had breast cancer, I really didn't have anybody supporting me or on my side. I basically went for the second lumpectomy by myself. And when it came to radiotherapy, it was by myself. But I asked God to be in there with me because I was afraid. But so many things, when I look at my life and I look back on my life, I have done a lot of things by myself and I've been afraid, but I've used emotional intelligence to get by. So I'm going to put myself, not that I like talking about myself as being a wonderful woman, but I'm going to put myself in the area of maybe a lower level heroic, heroic person. Now, the other person I'd like to mention is a First Nations person that I met when I was in Vancouver. His name's Stephen. He suffers from cerebral palsy. And so he doesn't really do that much. But what he does do is that he is an activist. He's like an activist for First Nations, which are basically what they call in America American Indians rights. And he's very, very good at it. So somebody that you would underestimate and you would not expect to be able to do that much has been able to achieve so much in his life. The last trigger, and the reason why I find all of these triggers so important is that they've all proved to be to they've gone against judging a book by its cover. All these people were underestimated and not expected to achieve much, and in the end, they've achieved more than what was expected of them. Malala is a hero's dream. Malala is the Yusuf Fuzzy is the Pakistan girl that was shot in the head by the Taliban after she sat and took an exam. Her mother was an education activist. And of course, everybody knows that in Pakistan and a lot of Muslim countries, uh, women are considered a much lower class citizens than the men. Let's put it that way. And on October night, 2012, while on a bus in the SWAT district, after taking an exam, Malala and two other girls were shot by the Taliban. They proceeded to take her to a hospital in Pakistan where they treated her until she got better. And then, of course, they removed the bullet. And then they took her to England where she recuperated and received an education. She has turned into quite an amazing woman. She received her education and went to Oxford and, of course, received top honours. And she has received many, many prizes all over the world for her heroic stance and her bravery because she said to the government, I am Malala. If you want, if you want to speak to somebody, speak to me. I'm Malala. And she wrote a book about her experience. Now, in Pakistan, they came up with what you call a fatwa, which was a judgmental warning against the Taliban. And the Taliban ignored this warning and tried to assassinate a second assassinate attempt on her. And they were basically scolded all over the world. So Malala for me is another hero. Now, I don't put myself in the same class as Malala, but I must admit, I was confronted by two policemen pointing a gun at me, and I can tell you that it's a very terrifying experience. And thank goodness, emotional intelligence was acting very, very strongly on my behalf when I was in that situation. So, those are the three triggers that I wanted to mention today. And that closes today's episode. And I would just like to say thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing, subscribing, and liking, and sending me some love. And I will close in my typical expression, and that is healing is a lifelong lesson, blessing, and gift we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Healing is a lifelong blessing, gift, and lesson we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Goodbye until next week.